Fear. It ruled every corner of the city. It was in the silence of shopkeepers who lowered their eyes when his name was spoken. It was in the hands of young men, steady when pulling a trigger but shaking when receiving a call from him. It was in the homes where families whispered at night, praying that the knock on their door would never come. For years, he built his empire on the suffering of others. Streets soaked in blood. Fortunes made from destruction. His enemies were erased, their bodies discarded like they never existed. Even those who had once been loyal knew that loyalty only went so far. The only way to stay alive was to obey. No questions. No hesitation. No mistakes. And then, there was her. She stepped into his world wearing white, draped in silk and diamonds, standing beside a man whose love came with a death sentence. The wedding was a spectacle, grand, extravagant, a performance for those who dared to attend. The guests smiled, their laughter forced, their toasts made with trembling hands. They all knew what she had married into. They knew what happened to those who crossed him. So why did she risk it? Why would any woman believe she could betray a man like that and live to tell the story? The truth was hidden in whispers. In glances exchanged when they thought no one was looking. In stolen moments that should have never existed. Her secret was a dangerous one, the kind that only had one ending. And when he found out, there was no escape. She didn't disappear. She didn't run. She didn't even have time to beg. Because when the door to his estate closed behind her, she was already gone. She thought she could love his son. She thought she could leave. She thought he wouldn't find out. She was wrong. Santa Armida. A city built on blood money. A place where the law was a joke, where justice belonged to the highest bidder. For decades, it had been under the rule of one man, a name that sent shivers through the streets. Emiliano El Rey Vasquez. He wasn't just a cartel boss. He was the cartel. The undisputed king of an empire that stretched from Mexico to the United States. His drugs flooded the streets, his money lined the pockets of corrupt officials, and his enemies, well, they simply disappeared. Some were found in mass graves outside the city. Others? Never found at all. The year was 2022. His power had never been stronger. His wealth had never been greater. And yet, despite everything, there was one thing even he couldn't control. A woman. And a betrayal that would shake his empire to its core. June 2, 2022, was supposed to be a new beginning. A grand event at Vasquez's private estate in the hills of Jalisco, Mexico. The estate itself was a fortress, built into the mountains, shielded from the world. Armed guards at every entrance, security cameras on every wall. No one got in without his approval. No one got out without his permission. And on the night of the wedding, it was filled with power. Over 300 guests, including politicians, businessmen, cartel leaders, and their wives. The scent of expensive cigars filled the air. The ballroom was draped in gold and deep red, the colors of wealth and blood. Live music played, laughter echoed, and glasses clinked in celebration. At the center of it all stood Camila Ortega, the woman who had just become Mrs. Vasquez. She was 27, young, beautiful, seemingly untouchable. Raised in luxury, educated abroad. To the outside world, she had just secured a life of wealth and status beyond imagination. But for those who understood the world she had married into, they knew the truth. She was a prisoner in the most gilded cage imaginable. And she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. 55 years old Emiliano Vasquez, aliases, El Rey, the King, the Butcher of Jalisco, was feared by law enforcement, rival cartels, and even his own men. He built his empire on violence, betrayal, and absolute control. He had survived assassination attempts, betrayals, government crackdowns, but nothing could prepare him for the betrayal he never saw coming. His wives never lasted long. Some left, some disappeared. But Camila? She was different. She was supposed to be his final queen. Until he started watching her more closely. Until he saw the way she looked at his son. 27 years old Camila Ortega was the daughter of a wealthy banker with deep cartel ties. Grew up in Mexico City. Educated in Spain. To the world, she had everything: wealth, status, beauty. To Emiliano, she was his possession. And to his son, she was something else entirely. 2 days after the wedding, she vanished. But she didn't run. She never even left the estate. 30 years old Nicolas Vasquez, the heir to his father's empire. Raised to be ruthless, but deep down, he was nothing like his father. Unlike Emiliano, Nicolas didn't thrive in bloodshed. He didn't hunger for power or control. He was born into a violent kingdom, but he never wanted the throne. And yet, one mistake sealed his fate. He fell in love. And that love would cost them everything. The whispers began on the wedding night. The staff noticed first. The stolen glances between Camila and Nicolas. The way she tensed whenever Emiliano touched her. The way Nicolas refused to meet his father's eyes. At first, Emiliano ignored it. He was used to paranoia. He had learned long ago that trust was a weakness. But then, something changed. 2 nights after the wedding, Camila didn't show up for breakfast. Her belongings were still in their place. Her phone was missing. The security cameras? Wiped clean. And Emiliano? He didn't call the police. He didn't ask his guards to search the estate. Because he already knew where she was. She wasn't missing. She was exactly where he left her. At first, no one said anything. No one dared. Camila was a new bride, the queen of a kingdom ruled by fear. And now, she was gone. Just 2 days after the wedding, she vanished from the estate without a single trace. In a city like Santa Armida, disappearances weren't questioned. People went missing all the time. Some left town in the middle of the night, some were forced into hiding, and others were simply never seen again. But Camila? She wasn't just anyone. And everyone knew Emiliano Vasquez didn't let go of what belonged to him. At first, the staff was told she left on her own. No one believed it. If she had run away, why had she left all her clothes? Her jewelry? Her passport? And why, just hours after she went missing, did Emiliano give a direct order to his guards? No one was allowed to ask about her. The first thing people noticed was Nicolas. The man who once held his head high, who carried the weight of his father's name, suddenly changed. He stopped speaking. His presence at the estate became a ghost of what it was. He no longer went to the meetings, no longer shared meals with his father. He stayed locked in his room, avoiding everyone. And when someone brought up Camila's name in passing, his face would go pale. His hands would clench. He knew something. And it was destroying him. Then, the whispers began. The housekeepers, the security staff, the drivers, they all started noticing things. Things that didn't make sense. The sheets from the master bedroom were missing. A bonfire was lit in the middle of the night. The housekeepers saw servants carrying bloody linens and burning them in the backyard. The surveillance footage from the estate, usually kept for months, was erased from the night she vanished. Someone was covering something up. And then, one of the housekeepers made a mistake. She asked a question. A simple one. A question about where Camila's wedding dress had gone. By the end of the day, she was fired. She left without her things, escorted off the property like a criminal. That's when the staff knew. Camila wasn't missing. She was dead. Emiliano Vasquez was not a man to be played with. And Camila? She played a very dangerous game. The affair had started long before the wedding. The stolen glances at dinners, the nights she would slip away, the way Nicholas looked at her when he thought no one was watching. They thought they could hide it. They thought he would never find out. They were wrong. Emiliano had suspected before the wedding. For him, the marriage was never about love. It was control. And if there was one thing Emiliano Vasquez couldn't tolerate, it was betrayal. Until now, Camila's disappearance had been nothing more than whispers, a quiet fear that hung over the Vasquez estate. People had their suspicions. The blood-stained sheets. The missing surveillance footage. The way Nicholas wouldn't speak. But there was no proof. Then, one person stepped forward. Someone who knew exactly why Camila was dead. Her name was Valeria Cruz, a woman who had known Camila since they were teenagers. They had gone to school together, traveled together, shared every secret with each other. And just weeks before the wedding, Camila had sent Valeria messages that no one was supposed to see. Valeria had tried to warn her. You don't understand what you're risking. But Camila didn't listen. She had been in love with Nicholas for months. And even after agreeing to marry Emiliano, she never let Nicholas go. When investigators read the messages, there was no doubt anymore. Camila had been playing with fire. She had loved Nicholas, not his father. And she had planned to run away. I love him. I don't care about the danger anymore. This isn't a marriage. It's a prison. I told him I would never love him. If he ever finds out, I won't make it out alive. I can't do this anymore. I have to tell Nicholas the truth. I'll tell him tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Because the next morning, she was gone. Camila wasn't just missing. She had been silenced. And there was only one man powerful enough to make her disappear without a trace. Emiliano Vasquez. The authorities knew they couldn't go after Emiliano directly. Not yet. He was too powerful, too protected. For weeks, Camila Ortega's disappearance had been nothing more than whispers, rumors passed between those who knew better than to ask questions. No police reports. No missing person bulletins. Just silence. But outside of Santa Armida, outside of Emiliano Vasquez's empire, someone had been watching. The DA. They had been tracking the Vasquez cartel for years, waiting for a crack in the walls of his empire. Camila's sudden disappearance. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. A tip was sent to local authorities, anonymous, urgent, undeniable. Check the estate. At first, the police hesitated. In a city like Santa Armida, law enforcement belonged to Emiliano. But this wasn't just an order from the local chief. This came from above. This was federal. And for the first time in decades, the police did something no one had dared to do. They entered Emiliano Vasquez's estate. The convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the gates of the Vasquez estate just after sunset. Armed officers, federal police, special units, stood in formation, hands on their weapons. Inside, the guards didn't resist. They didn't have to. They already knew what the police were going to find. A heavy steel door. A basement hidden beneath the estate. And a freezer. When they pried it open, the stench hit them first, chemical, metallic, sickly sweet. And inside, wrapped in thick plastic, frozen solid. Camila. Or what was left of her. At first, the officers thought they had found multiple bodies. But the truth was worse. It was her. Dismembered with surgical precision. The blood, gone. Drained completely, as if it had been taken somewhere else. And the worst part? There was no sign of struggle. No defensive wounds. No bruises from restraint. Because she never had a chance. At first, Nicholas Vasquez refused to speak. Brought in for questioning, he sat in the interrogation room motionless, hollow-eyed, barely breathing. For hours, he said nothing. Then, finally, his hands shaking, his voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. I heard her scream. I knew what he was doing. But I was too afraid to stop him. He had known from the beginning. The night Camila disappeared, he had been in his room when he heard the muffled cries. He knew where they were coming from. He knew who was hurting her. But he didn't move. He didn't fight. Because Nicolas Vasquez, the heir to a kingdom of blood, was just as terrified as everyone else. When Emiliano Vasquez was arrested, he didn't resist. He didn't protest, didn't ask for a lawyer. He sat in the back of the armored police truck, hands resting in his lap, his face calm. And in court, when they played his son's confession, when they showed the photos of Camila's remains, he didn't flinch. He smirked. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he leaned forward, stared into the cameras, and answered with chilling ease. She betrayed me. In my world, there's only one punishment for that. No remorse. No regret. No hesitation. Just a king who had enforced his own justice. Even if it meant killing his own bride. The prosecution presented everything. The messages from Camila. Nicolas' confession. The forensic evidence. And in front of the entire courtroom, they displayed a single, haunting photograph. Camila's wedding dress. Found buried in the backyard. Torn, blood-stained, and burned at the edges. The jury didn't take long to decide. Guilty. Life without parole. But even as the verdict was read, Emiliano never showed a single sign of regret. Instead, he leaned forward, stared directly into the cameras, and said, She betrayed me. In my world, there's only one punishment for that. Even in chains, even behind bars, Emiliano Vasquez still believed he was king. Nicolas Vasquez cut all ties with his father. He refused to visit, refused to speak his name again. Valeria Cruz disappeared after testifying. Witness protection. New identity. New life. But she will always be looking over her shoulder. Santa Armida remains under cartel control. Emiliano is gone, but his men? They're still out there. The murder of Camila Ortega serves as a warning. Even now, years later, people speak her name in hushed voices. Because if there's one thing Santa Armida never forgets, it's what happens to those who cross Emiliano Vasquez. Was this a love story? Or a death sentence? Was Camila Ortega truly a victim, or did she underestimate the monster she had married? What do you think? Do you think Nicolas was a victim or a coward? Would Camila have survived if she had run sooner? Does cartel justice ever truly end? Subscribe for more cases. Comment your theories below. Hit the like button if this case shocked you.